President Donald Trump says that he wants to deport American citizens convicted of crimes.
He says it will help the prison population and save money. But there are questions about whether this is even legal. Perry Russom with more in Washington.
In a live stream broadcast from inside the Oval Office, President Trump can be heard telling El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele he wants to send American citizens convicted of crimes to prison in El Salvador, as Trump calls them homegrowns.
I said, homegrowns are next. The homegrowns, you got to build about 5 more places.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right? It's not big enough.
Bukele has taken in hundreds of migrants deported from the U.S. accused of being gang members, sending them here to this mega prison called SECAD in exchange for millions of dollars. Trump mentioning the idea again minutes later to reporters as he sat down with his cabinet, including Attorney General Pam Bondi.
To Pam, I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country.
Trump says it would help with America's prison population. According to the Department of Justice, in 2022, there were more than 1.2 million people in prisons in the U.S. Trump's call to deport American criminals opens a trove of legal questions. Ultimately, whether Americans can be kicked out of their own country. Trump says sending criminals to El Salvador would save the U.S. money with what he calls great security.
We have a huge number of prisons, and then we have the private prisons, and some are operated well, I guess, and some aren't. But he does a great job with that. We have others that we're negotiating with too. But no, if it's a homegrown criminal, I have no problem.
In a new interview with Fox Noticias, Trump is repeating calls to deport American criminals, saying we are looking into it and we want to do it. I would love to do that. Perry Russom, ABC News, Washington.
Skeptical that we will have Republican support because the Republican Party is fully captive to Donald Trump. But of all the abuses of Donald Trump's presidency, there's no greater threat to liberty than his complete contempt for due process. Without due process, what stops Donald Trump from wrongfully labeling any American as a non-citizen gang member and abducting them in the dead of night and rendering them to a foreign prison to be tortured? Donald Trump's actions set a dangerous precedent for our democracy. And so I'm introducing legislation known as the Rescue Act, which would seek to secure the release of those who have been wrongfully deported. If there's a foreign leader like the president of El Salvador, who refuses to comply with an order from a federal court to release someone who's been wrongfully deported, there should be geopolitical consequences, and those consequences should be swift and severe. It should include the suspension of relations with the United States and the termination of foreign assistance.
Jeremiah 30 and verse 5. For thus saith Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask ye now, and see whether a man doth travail a child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins, as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachach Badash. Double honors to the elder apostles and the elder bishops of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations to the Akim out here pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quanah Watts from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the Spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Lord will, it is edifying. Lord will, it is straight to the point. And as you had seen, in the videos, that had just played, right? Trump is ultimately talking about coming and getting those who are homegrown, right? U.S. citizens, which 2 Corinthians 2:11, right? We're not ignorant of Satan's devices. We understand, right? The reason for that, right, is because Esau wants to get rid of the Israelites, right, which are you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, right, who are the ones he hates, right, pursuant to Ezekiel 35th chapter and verse 5, right? He has perpetual hatred against the Israelites, the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. And we say that because when you look at that video, right, when Trump was speaking, you know, it showed you, right, it showed you a man's hands coming out of a, you know, out of a, what looked to be a, you know, a prison cell, right, with the bars. And it looked to be a so-called black man's hands, right? It could have been any, but it's a so-called black man's hands that were coming out of that prison, right? And then on top of that, right, when it showed you those who were in the El Salvador prison, they looked like the so-called Latinos, right, the northern tribes, man, you know, because again, that's who, you know, his aim is at, right? When it came to the whole border situation, you know, who was he talking about, you know, coming over and you know, being criminals and so on and so forth? It was the northern tribes, man. You know, the so-called Latinos, man. You know, and you had all the different nations coming across the border, right? He was only focused, right, on a certain people coming across the border, you know? Again, further proving, right, that the so-called white man, right, Esau, Edom, biblically called Esau, Edom, right, is the enemy of the Israelites, man. You know, the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans again today, you know. But again, right, we understand why he's doing all this, man, right? And that's because, you know, Yahweh Shemel Shah has ultimately rose up, you know, a remnant, right, to come against this damn devil, man. You know, to stand up and to tell and to identify who this damn devil is, you know, pursuant to, let's go to this right here, Revelations 11:11. It says, and after 3 days and a half, right, which goes into that 350 year period, right, from 1619 all the way to 1969, right, of us being in captivity, right, not having this wisdom, knowledge, or understanding, you know. And then Yahweh Shemel Shah ultimately rose up, you know, Abba Bivens, who we believe through his spirit to be Elijah the prophet, you know, to ultimately, you know, bring the, you know, bring us back, right, to the knowledge of who we are, right, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shemel Shah, through the grace and mercy of Yahweh Shemel Shah, man, all the way down to our elder apostles, the bishops and elders and Akim, you know, such as myself, right, preaching this gospel, you know. It says the spirit of life from the Most High entered into them, meaning, hey, guess what? That this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, right, is now dwelling within us, you know. To the best of our ability, we are trying to keep the law, statutes, and commandments, right? We're going against the grain of the world, right? And see, Esau sees that, man, right? He sees that there are a certain, you know, certain groups, right, of Israelites, right, that are ultimately, you know, going against this normal system, right, following in, you know, Christianity and, you know, being, you know, following it again in the ways of the world ultimately, right, and doing, you know, something different, you know. And this is why Esau is ultimately, you know, starting to pick up, you know, his attitude when you know, dealing with trying to get rid of, you know, certain people, right? Because now at this point, right, his talk is getting real draconian, real reckless, man. Trump, you know, showing you again the times that we're in, where Jacob's trouble is literally around the corner, you know. And again, the reasons why it's called Jacob's trouble is because Esau's main focus are the Israelites, right? You can read that in Psalms, the 83rd chapter, you know. All these nations really, right, but mainly Esau, Edom, man, you know. And he gonna come down having great wrath, as we read about Revelations 12:12, right? Because he know he hath but a short time. When he sees these men standing upon their feet, right? That's why it says right there, it says, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them, right? Esau knows that when, you know, Yahweh Shemel Shah raises up his prophets, right, that is the beginning right, of the downfall of whatever kingdom, right, is established at the time, right? So he sees the prophets coming up, and they're doing what? They're revealing who he is, right, which is prophecy, 2 Thessalonians 2:3, and his agenda, you know. And again, this is why Esau's coming down so hard, you know, with saying with what what he's saying. And this isn't just happening, here in America, man. Elder Manasseh Zakbar had brought out this, it's on ChristianPost.com, brought out this article. It says, Labor Council seeks to imprison street preachers up to 2 years for causing offense, distress, right? And the Elder Manasseh Zakbar beautifully touched on it, that everything that we're bringing out, right, is ultimately offending this damn devil, man. We're talking about, again, his system that he has currently set up, right, and how it's ultimately established on wickedness, man. And we're coming against, right, this narrative that Esau's trying to push, right, and keep the people in, right, being a Mo, coming up against the alphabet soup groups, and so on and so forth, man. And this is how Esau is trying to, get it to where, we're basically labeled as, something negative. He's trying to create the, the laws and policies and bills, right, to put them in place so that way he can come and get us, man. Right? Esau isn't just going to do this, right, and, outright, man. Esau works in gradualism, right? Esau wants to take the path of least resistance, so when he comes in like a flood, right, he wants to be in the eyes of the people seen, right, as doing the right thing. But we understand, right, again, we're not ignorant of Satan's device. We understand that what he's doing, right, is really wicked, man. It's really evil, It says Christians to be, which we know who he's talking about, right? We're talking about those that follow Yahweh Shemel Shah. Right, it says to be criminalized for handing out Bibles, praying for, laying hands on people, man. It says the Labour Party-run council in England has sparked outrage by proposing a sweeping injunction that could imprison Christian street preachers for up to 2 years over claims of causing offense and distress. It says the Rushmore Borough Council, covering Farnborough and Aldershot, has faced accusation for attempting to criminalize Christians for preaching, praying, and distributing Bibles in public spaces. Right, it says council initially applied for the injunction in February, citing complaints about noise, public disruption, and distress caused by street preachers. It says under the proposed terms, Christians would be banned from praying for individuals without prior consent, handing out religious leaflets or Bibles by hand, which we know that IUIC, right, they hand out those pamphlets, so that would ultimately, even if they're trying to say, oh no, we're talking about the Christians, well, no, they can lump us in there, man, right? So this isn't something that, again, we understand, right, why Esau's doing this, man, and why Esau, is being so specific, right, handing out pamphlets and so on and so forth, right? Come on, man, It says, and laying hands on people in prayer, even permission, according to the Telegraph. It says the injunction also sought to prohibit approaching individuals to discuss religion and preaching messages that could be perceived as hostile toward protected characteristics such as age, gender, or sexual orientation. There you go, right, against the the alphabet soup groups and so on and so forth, man. This is how they're ultimately trying to, get us to say, hey, well, they're harassing people, right? They hate, and so on and so forth, man. Putting these titles on us, man, right? But all we're doing is telling the truth, right? The Lord, when it comes to these alphabet soup groups, all that shit's wicked, right? A man sleeping with a man, or a man, woman, wearing, women's clothing, right? These drags and shit. That's all against the scriptures, man. But see, that's what's pushed in this society, right? That's what's pushed, in this world, man. And again, the prophets are standing up on their feet, speaking these things, man. And this is what's, and bringing out, right, the fact that Yahweh Shai, you know, when he comes back, is gonna destroy them for this, man. You know, and this is why I said, "And great fear fell upon them," you know, because now they see that their end is coming, and this is why they're moving so quick. They're moving so hard, right? We got to get rid of these people, man. And Esau been waiting, man. You know, Esau has been waiting. He's got these militias and, you know, white supremacist groups that, you know, Esau's saying that they're the number one terrorists, this and the third, but then he ain't coming to get them at all. You know, but then here he is pointing at, you know, us, right, the Israelites, right, who are a far lesser threat than really anybody, right? China's more of a threat, but here he is focusing on us, you know, and passing laws and legislation on us, man. He ain't even really dealing with, you know, China like that, man. Yeah, it's a trade war, but, you know, that can happen behind your closed doors and shit, man. You know, he's out in the open really coming at us hard, man. You know, and again, this isn't just happening here, you know, in America. It's happening all over, you know, all over the world, right? As we're reading, right? This is over in the UK. They're coming like this, man. You know, but see, these things go hand in hand because this is the sentiment, right? That's ultimately going to, you know, encompass the whole world, right? Jacob's trouble, right, is going to encompass the whole world. That's why it's called the hour of temptation, right? It's going to try the whole world. These are the times that we're in, you know. It says violations of the injunction could result in fines, arrest, and maximum prison sentence of 2 years, you know, which again, this is leading to, you know, that persecution as well, man, you know, for those that speak against this society, you know. But I want to grab this real quick, right? It'll kind of, you know, encompass both, you know, in one, right? Jacob's trouble as well as the persecution, right? This is 2 Esdras 16 and verse 68. It says, "For behold, the burning wrath of a great multitude is kindled over you, and they shall take away certain of you and feed you, being idle with things offered unto idols," right? So Esau, you know, again, right, snatching people up, man, you know, and putting them in prisons, man, you know, and you know, they're going to, just like they did, you know, our forefather Eleazar, right, basically, you know, try to, you know, force him to, you know, eat that swine, you know, even, you know, trying to, you know, have him be deceptive himself, right? Say, you know, eat your lawful meat, but say that you're eating the swine, and he wasn't about it, man. You know, and that's the same spirit that we got to be in, Slaki. You know, but that's the same spirit that we got to be in, man. Remaining faithful to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua, standing stiffly for the law, such commandments of our fathers, man. You know, of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua. You know, verse 69, it says, and they that consent shall be had in derision and reproach and trodden underfoot. It says, for there shall be in every place and in the next cities a great insurrection upon those that fear the Lord. And again, right, Esau doesn't know who the elect is, right? So this is why he's saying, you know what, we're gonna put them all in one blanket, under one blanket, right? All the Israelites, man, because at the end of the day, he hates the Israelites. Right? He doesn't know who is ultimately going to be the elect that are going to, you know, ultimately overcome, you know, because we understand that Esau knows to a certain degree, like, what's coming, man. Right? The prophets have been telling him, and then on top of that, you got the, you know, different events that have happened throughout time that, hey, Esau knows that power's coming for us, man. Right? True power. Right? We're going to receive that power. And see, he's trying to stop that, but he can't, you know. He's not going to be able to do it, man. You know, he's going to lose at the end of the day, right? The Lord is going to, you know, disappoint his enterprise, man. You know, but I'll keep going. It says they should be like madmen, sparing none, but still spoiling and destroying those that fear the Lord, man. You know, Esau's not going to give a fuck, man. We already see him. Even their kids are practicing with their guns and, you know, and you know, being spot on, you know, being spot the fuck on, being 8-9 years old, man, you know, Jake, and then on top of that, he's got his robot armies and so on and so forth. There's drones and shit, and we don't stand a chance if we don't have Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua, man. We don't stand no chance, right? It says they shall waste and take away their goods and cast them out of their houses, right? Meaning he gonna take you, snatch you up, and throw you into a female camp, you know, and that goes for, you know, a lot of people, you know, even some of us, man. Right? Some of us are going to get snatched up, you know, whether it be, you know, right when things pop off, right, when all hell breaks loose, right, whether it be, you know, a little bit before or even after, you know, while everything's happening, you know, you get snatched up. We don't know necessarily how it's going to play out, but we understand, right, that it is going to happen. Why? Because it's according to prophecy, right? Prophecy is playing out before our eyes, man, you know. So we know that it's coming, right? We know that it's going to happen, you know. But see, the scriptures say that, you know, we should not be afraid of evil tidings. That's in Psalms 112, right? That we're not going to be afraid of evil tidings, meaning bad news, right? This is technically bad news, right, to the average man, but to us, it's good news. Why? Because we're one step closer, right, to the kingdom, right? Scriptures say in Romans 8:18 that all these things, right, all the sufferings that we're, you know, enduring, right, currently, and are gonna endure, are nothing to be compared, right, to the things that shall be revealed in us, roughly paraphrasing, right? You know, so we have to go through this in order to, you know, reach the kingdom, you know, in order to receive the ultimate reward that we can receive. We have to go through this situation, man, you know. That's why it says, right, it says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer, right, in Revelations 2:10, you know. But I want to read this in verse 73. It says, then shall they be known who are my chosen. Because at that moment, right, that's going to be the ultimate test of our faith, right? And Lord, will we be of the elect? And Lord, will, right, our, you know, Yahweh Shema Shah has equipped us with enough faith, you know. We're gonna pass that test, man. And the Lord is going to reward us, you know, with protection, with, you know, some of us with special powers, you know, the spiritual powers, right, to defend ourselves and those around us, you know, to be able to, you know, get out of the situation, however it may be, right? We understand that this is what's coming. This is why, right, you know, we're not to fear, right? The Lord said what? He gave us not the spirit of fear, but a power of love and of a sound mind, right? To meditate and to walk according to the words of Yahweh Shem Shai, right? As much as possible, man. Staying in the spirit as much as possible, right? And in doing so, right, when situations arise, we'll know how to move, right? Because we'll be moving in the spirit of the Lord Yahweh Shem Shai, you know? And that's what will allow for us to shine. That's what will allow for us to, you know, to maneuver through these situations, man, you know? And people are going to see that, right? People are going to see that, we, you know, this is why, you know, it talks about Isaiah 4:1, right? Isaiah was at 13:12, right? A man shall be, you know, more precious than gold than fine gold, right? That's talking about the men of the Lord. Why? Because they're going to be applying these scriptures, man. They're going to be walking in the spirit, applying the scriptures, even in the worst times, you know? And that's going to allow for the protection. That's going to allow for the different miracles to happen, man, you know? And again, Lord, will we be of that number? That's going to be us, you know? And this is why it says, then shall they be known who are my chosen, and they shall be tried as gold in the fire. Because the Lord is going to allow us to shine, man. You know? The Lord is going to allow for us to shine because we trust and believe in Yahweh Shem Shai that he's going to deliver us out of said situations, man. You know? You know, even a, you know, quick testimony, you know, a couple weeks ago I was in, you know, I was held up at gunpoint, man. Right? For doing a side job. You know what I mean? I wasn't doing anything shady. You know, I was just doing my job. You know, customer wasn't satisfied with it, man, and locked me in his backyard and held me at gunpoint, man. You know? He didn't even want to pay me, you know, but he ended up getting paid, right? And his wife wasn't at home. He was outside in the backyard pointing a gun at me, and the Lord opened up the fence, man. No one was home to open up the fence. At first, I thought it was his wife that was there, you know, but when the cops showed up and everything like that, you know, she pulled up, you know, maybe 10 minutes later, 7 to 10 minutes later, you know, like she wasn't even home. So that was the Lord that opened up that gate, allowed me to escape that situation, man. You know, and see, the Lord is going to do that more and more, right, for those that truly believe, man. You know, and I pray I be of that number as well, you know, that the Lord does those miracles for, man. But see, the Lord is going to get us out of these different situations, man. You know, we just have to continue to trust and believe, man. You know, and that Yahweh Shem Yahshai going to get us out of here. You know, and I'll keep reading and we'll close out. It says, "Hear, O ye my beloved, saith the Lord, behold, the days of trouble are at hand." Right, we're right around the corner from Jacob's trouble, man. You know, it says, "But I will deliver you from the same," and that's the spirit right there, man. You know, whether it be big trouble, right, whether it be small trouble, right, or the ultimate trouble, which is the trouble we're coming into, Jacob's trouble, where there is going to be persecution, there is going to be the famine of the word, right? All these different prophecies that we're speaking about, all these things are going to come, you know, are going to happen, right, simultaneously, man, back to back, you know. So we're going to be, trouble is right around the corner. But see, the Lord's telling us, man, that he's going to deliver us from the same. That's why he says, "Be ye not afraid, neither doubt, for the Most High is your guide." And when you go back to that word guide, right, it goes back to, you know, that word keep, right, to protect, right, to care for, you know. The Lord said in Wisdom of Solomon 3:9, I think it says in Wisdom of Solomon 3:9, he hath care for his elect, you know. So he's going to protect them and guide them, you know. It says, "And the guide of them who keep my commandments and precepts, saith the Lord God, let not your sins weigh you down, let not your iniquities lift up themselves." That's right, man. You know, we're at the end, right? We have to continue to focus on Yahweh Shem Shai, focus on the kingdom, right? Of course, we balance it out, right? As we meditate on these things that are coming, right? We meditate on the kingdom as well, right? Having that that perfect balance, but nonetheless, right? Continue to trust and believe in Yahweh Shem Shai. Continue to pray. Right, we're almost out of here. You know, so with that, Lord wills edifying, Lord wills straight to the point. I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Barachak, Badash, double honor to the elder apostles, the other bishops of the Great Millstone. So next time I say Shalom.